Let's discuss this and other matters arising from the budget with our political panel. Joining us in the studio today, Labor MP Sally Situ, the member for Reid, and Victorian MP Zoe McKenzie, member for Flinders. Welcome both. Great to have you right back here on what is for us home turf here on an afternoon briefing. Sally, to you first of all, the cost of living package encompassing, as it does, job seeker, youth allowance, the Medicare bulk billing subsidy that we were talking to Mark Butler about and more. What difference do you think it'll make, leaving aside arguments over whether it's inflationary or not? Is it big enough to make a difference to those who rely on those payments?
Yeah, I think all budgets paint a picture of what a government cares about. And it's clear from this budget that this government cares about helping people with cost of living, so job seeker increases to rental assistance. We also care about the health and well-being of Australians, and we see that through the tripling of the bulk bill incentives for GPs, cheaper medicines, but importantly, we care about making sure that we put this budget and this economy on a sustainable footing. And that's what the Treasurer has done. We are making sure that we're not adding to inflation, we're delivering a surplus, something we haven't seen in 15 years. That's what an economically responsible government does that cares about the community. You
come from a high inflation part of Sydney. Heat maps sort of show that prices are rising in your neck of the woods more than others. So when I say what difference will it make, have you made any attempt to cameo out or build up profiles for what the collective amount of assistance in these various packages equates to for particular constituents?
Yes, inflation is a problem in my neck of the woods. Inflation is a problem around the world. So it's not isolated to Australia. Governments around the world are trying to do their best to tackle it. And I think what this budget does is two really important things. One, help households in a targeted manner, but also it doesn't add to inflation, and that helps everyone. If we can bring down inflation, we all benefit from that, and that's exactly what this budget does. Are
you convinced about that, Zoe McKenzie, on the inflation question, since Sally took us there, that in aggregate, these spends, targeted though they are,
so it's $185 billion in spending, and not much of it is targeted to reduce inflation, meaning it remains the Reserve Bank's job to have a heavy-handed instrument in trying to curb inflation. Sally makes the point that inflation is global. That is true, but inflation here is still higher than the US, Canada, France and other countries. So the government would like us to believe this is Kiev-caused inflation, but at this point it's becoming Canberra-caused inflation, and not enough is being done to restrain it.
Well, if Canberra causes it, Canberra can solve it,
sure, there are many things you can do to not incentivise spending and wage growth. We see that across the economy at the moment, and it's getting harder. It's getting harder to afford all those things. Talk to any small business. I had a small business write to me today from Somerville just saying this is beginning to feel like the 80s. People are stopping spending, people are worried about the future. I'm going to have to set off staff in a few months' time. And so it's a really uncertain economy, but not enough is being done to curb inflation.
Greg, the question for Zoe and her team is, what of the measures that we have announced would they take off the cards? So would they not like to see a job seeker increase? Would they not like to see people get rental assistance increase? These measures are targeted and specifically aimed at helping households during this period. What we have done, and this is critical, is that we have banked 87% of the revenue upgrade over the last two budgets, and we've put that back into the budget. And that is what an economically responsible government does.
Well, thank you for doing that, Sally, because that was going to be my next question to Zoe. So you can pick and choose, I suppose, between measures. It looks as though there is support from your side, listening to Peter Dutton and others, Angus Taylor, for the energy bill relief.
And some in relation to Medicare as well, though. But can I say, an economically responsible government gives this government the opportunity to have a balanced budget. The conditions were set in place before May of last year that enabled a budget surplus this time around. and therefore some of the hard work had been done. We came out of the pandemic, a very expensive pandemic, one of the strongest economies in the Western world. So they were gifted great economic management beforehand. They were gifted increased revenue from commodity prices, and they've been gifted increased taxation from the hard work of
$77 billion deficit. And so this is the biggest turnaround on record, from a $77 billion deficit to a $4.2 billion surplus.
You keep stressing, Sally, the budget responsibility, the fiscal responsibility that's embedded within this budget. Is that because constituents in Reid are uncomfortable or express to you some discomfort about rising debt, rising deficits? Where do they place the need for individual support against the collective state of the books?
I think there are always two things that all governments have to balance. One is making sure that we're helping people where they need help, but one is setting up the economy for the future. And if we are to do that, we need to be looking to where we need to be investing. So this budget has significant investments in green renewable energy. It has significant investments and something that we've talked about often around investing in manufacturing. So we want to help households now, but we also want to make sure that we're setting ourselves up for a good future.
Quick one on NDIS, Zoe, because it has come up today in questions to the Treasurer. There are savings, I think is the word, not cuts, and we kind of need to be accurate in our language on these things because it does upset participants. Do you think it's valid to be identifying the money both in the forward estimates and then an even larger amount, $59 billion to be precise, in the out years?
It is a really big figure in terms of estimated savings for NDIS. I know obviously that Bill Shorten gave an address to the Press Club recently and pointed out where there had been mismanagement in the sector, where there had been potentially criminal conduct. So that's front of mind for him. He's got a review on foot, and that will report back in October, and we'll see what happens then. But I was surprised by the size of the savings banked in anticipation of that report, as well as a cap of 8% growth on funding when you're not really sure what the conditions of the program are going to look like after October.
The details are still outstanding, Sally, but on the numbers that we see, is that fair that those savings be found in order, this is the government's argument, to make the scheme sustainable?
We want to make sure that the NDIS is sustainable because it is here to stay. It is a Labor legacy, and participants are saying that it has improved their lives and it has changed their lives. But we know that there needs to be significant reform to the NDIS. So I was door knocking in Mortlake, and a mum said to me, why does she have to prove every couple of years that her son still has epilepsy? We are moving people to longer term plans so they don't have to produce expensive reports and then go through the rigmarole of proving these things. And like Zoe said, we're cracking down on dodgy providers. We're also providing more staff in the NDIA because we need specialised staff with an expertise in this area so that we can treat participants as human beings and put them at the centre of the NDIS, which was the original intent of the program.
Sure, and no doubt the details will come on exactly what that translates to by Bill Shorten and others. On housing, we're getting some rent assistance, 15% increase coming through this budget, and yet it doesn't seem like that's going to touch the sides really, Sally, on the price increases that renters are up for in the current environment. What else is coming down the pipe, if anything, to help them, or do they just have to muddle through?
There is no doubt we're in a housing affordability crisis, and I feel that most acutely in my electorate in Sydney, where 45% of people who live there are renters, so they feel the rental increases. So there are two things that we need to do here. One is to help people with financial relief so that they can afford their rent, so increasing rent assistance, make sure that it's easier for them to save to buy their first home, and that's something that we're doing. The other key issue here, and we need to remember that the housing affordability crisis did not come overnight. It's been a long time brewing and wasn't helped by the Coalition's 9 years of neglect, was that we are wanting to build an additional 30,000 more social and affordable housing. And I think this is an opportunity for Zoe and her side to get on board and back in that bill.
Well, that's hanging in the balance in the Senate. I'm not necessarily banking on your side changing position there late in the game, Zoe, but on, you know, rental assistance and other forms, it doesn't look like it's going to make a big difference out there.
Can I say
pretty active market.
We're heading for a perfect storm in relation to housing. So it's floated that we're going to have 1.5 million more people coming to Australia. Where on earth are they going to live? It is virtually impossible to find a rental property, and if you do, you're facing 5, 10, 15% increases in terms of its rental and affordability.
So you'd wind that migration setting down?
Well, it's at the same time, it's a kind of catch-22. Like on the peninsula, we are desperate for workers, but we have some of the workers there. The most common thing I had coming into my campaign office during the campaign was pensioners saying, I really want to work more. Please let me work in my son's cafe. I need to help out on the farm. I've got the energy. I want to do it. But if I do it, I get penalised. Let pensioners work if they want to work. Help women back into the workforce. So we've got people there in houses already. If we can just activate them into the workforce more and more programs to do that, that would be a great start. And skilled migration is obviously a necessary part of where we're going in economic growth. But 1.5 million, where are we going to put them?
Yeah, well, I think that's a work in progress for the government. You know, the migration reforms anyway around skilled visas and the like. Zoe McKenzie, Sally Situ, time's beaten us today. We could have gone on for hours, I guess. There's so much in the budget, but we've covered the core cost of living elements nonetheless. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll get you back soon. Now, that's all.